Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Altmed podcast. Mitch is already laughing at me. I don't know why that
Just
is.
smiling, just smiling. I'm
Just
happy
having
to
a
be
little
here.
giggle. Good on you. Thank you. We have a very special guest today. We have one of the more experienced nurse practitioners with a special interest in medicinal cannabis. It is none other than Simone O'Brien. Simone, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hello, Andrew. Hello, Mitch. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for coming on and being our first nurse practitioner, which, to be honest, before we were in this industry, I actually didn't know existed. Apologies in advance. I didn't know that it was.
Fine.
Yeah, it was actually a very specialist kind of title. And I think it's probably the best place that we could start for those who may have been like me and weren't aware of what a nurse practitioner is actually, and then a little bit about how you became one and how you found yourself with this very special interest.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, Mitch. Hi, everyone. I'm Simone. I'm a nurse practitioner. I've been a nurse for about 30 years. And round about in the mid 2000s, I thought, back then nurses really only had opportunities to go into management or stay in a clinical area. I'm not suited as a manager. I love the patients, wanted to stay patient care. So I looked into nurse practitioner. Now, nurse practitioners have been around in Australia for about 21 years. They've been widely used in the States for, I think, about 50 years, and England, other countries. So 21 years ago, it was a relatively new concept for us here in Australia. However, we're now down the track. I think there's probably over 2,000 of us now around Australia. We work in specialty fields, so you will see them in areas like palliative care, addiction medicine, emergency medicine, cannabis medicine now, and even things like, complex wound management. So while we might be, how I like to describe it to people who don't know what a nurse practitioner does, is while we may share some roles with it, some similar tasks with our medical colleagues in that we can diagnose, we can order tests, we can prescribe. So we share those commonalities, but we tend to sort of, nurse practitioners probably, we come from a nursing framework, so we look through a different lens at the patient. Our views usually quite holistic, and we approach the patient usually from a sort of biosocial, physical model where we're looking all round and through a nursing lens with those additional with the sort of added the tasks built in as well. So it's quite, if you see a nurse prac, you usually get a fairly comprehensive service.
Yeah, we often hear that there's differences in the type of care you might receive when you're at the hospital.
I never want to sort of say, I don't want to compare the two, don't ever want to compare, a doctor and a nurse prac. I think we have different roles, we have different views. And
I was going to compare the doctor to the nurse originally, and then I was going to say that the nurse practitioner maybe gets a bit of the best of both worlds in a sense.
That's good. It's kind of, I think what I've seen in clinical practice, and I've been a nurse prac for nearly 10 years. What I've seen in clinical practice is that it is a great benefit to doctors. It's the medical colleagues I work with. It's certainly a very cohesive role. We work very closely together and share patients and things like that.
Yeah, beautiful. And so how did you, coming into being a nurse practitioner, how did you find yourself with, finding medical cannabis patients and that type of thing?
So a bit of a journey. I'll give a little shout out to my brother who moved over to Ireland in about 2017, I think, to set up some of the first cannabis dispensaries over there. You can Google him. He set up Little Collins CBD over in Kilkenny and Galway. So that sort of piqued my interest back. I'd obviously tried cannabis as an undergraduate nurse and things like that, in my deacon days. But, hadn't tried it for quite some time. And anyway, my brother moved overseas. That got me interested in, studying it from perhaps more of maybe this isn't a drug. Maybe it is a medicine. So it sort of got me reading. Then in 2019, I was what I would describe a careless dickhead, in that I'd been at work all day. I'd left work, went and saw a close girlfriend, and had a few wines with her. And then as I was leaving, I was in Crocs and scrubs. It was a wet night in Bendigo. Went literally skidding as I was running down to the taxi, and it changed my life. It shattered my left leg. I now have a permanent injury, and I've got 2 long plates in there and 22 bolts through the bones. And I live with that, so I've got permanent pain. So after that journey, I was a patient too for a long time. I had to have multiple operations, bone grafts, things like that. I was on a lot of opioids and a lot of traditional medications like Lyrica and things like that for my pain. None of them worked particularly well. In fact, some of them didn't work at all. They made me sick. They made me put on a lot of weight. They affected my head. When I went back to my surgeon eventually to ask if he could take the metal out because it was giving me so much grief, he said he'd take it out when he amputated my leg. So I thought, I really have to look at alternative pain relief. So that's when I jumped in myself into cannabis and tried it, and I haven't looked back.
Wow, that is that's incredible. So what? Just kind of exploring that a bit further. What was it that you first tried? I imagine with pain like that, you'd be wanting to grab a flower and vape it up.
I did. I'm just like every other patient. I first tried the illicit stuff because it was easier to get.
Yeah.
It's easier to get that from your mate than it is to go through the rigmarole that we all have to go through to get it.
Yeah.
So I tried that, worked really effectively. I started making some of my own butter as well. Tried it that way. Yes, I know. I now use a combination of oil and flour.
Wow.
And I'm assuming you didn't have access to the vape in the early days there.
No. I had to do it the old-fashioned way, the early 1990s way.
Is that where the doctor tells you to have cannabis flower and then rolls up a joint for you? I'm just trying to recall exactly.
No.
Depends on the doctor, I suppose. But
if the flower injected straight into the main line, into the
IV. No, I didn't have a vape at first. I had to do it the old-fashioned way.
Yeah, the Woodstock way, they call it.
Yeah. Oh, okay. That's the early 1990s way, the Nirvana way.
The Nirvana way.
As in you reach Nirvana.
No, that's bad Nirvana.
Yes. Yeah. So, okay, interesting. So, and that's all the way up there in Bendigo, which is a very interesting point because, a lot of the time when we're speaking with doctors or health professionals we've had on the show, many of them are obviously metropolitan, and it's, a very specific, I don't want to say specific way of doing things, but I imagine there would be a few nuances to practicing in rural versus maybe metro with cannabis. Is there anything to consider when you're dealing with maybe small? I imagine the stigma might be different in, say, a rural place as well. Things like that we don't really think about all the time.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So up in sort of what I've seen from a rural perspective. So I'm based in Bendigo, and I see patients privately in Bendigo, but I also work out in a small town called Heathcote, and I work at the local hospital there. So I do a lot of outreach in our community, and go and see I've been doing this in this particular role for about 6 years, going out and seeing the most complex in our community who perhaps don't want to access us. So that can be for a variety of reasons: mental health, pain, aged care at home, palliative care at home, that kind of stuff. So usually with those patients, the GPs and I will share them, and I'll sort of do I guess I'll call it the grunt work, go out to the house, I'll do that clinical facing work, take over their prescribing, do whatever needs to be done to sort of relink them in with care. The beauty of that role is in the last 2 years, I've been able to add cannabis to my toolkit. So now when I go out and see these complex people, I can start them on cannabis. And the results that we've seen from it have just been amazing. It's been so popular at Heathcote that we've actually had to start a clinic. We run a cannabis clinic every Wednesday and Thursday morning, just so we can keep track of the volume of patients that we're seeing through it.
Yeah, wow.
I would have. Yeah. Does it go down nicely with a Heathcote Shiraz?
Yes.
I was going to say, they grow some amazing plants out there for wine. I'm trying to think of what they could do for cannabis in that range.
I completely agree. There's a lot of empty paddocks out there. And it's got some great sunshine up in central Victoria. So I agree. But it's just been amazing because we had a few years back, we had an opioid crisis in Heathcote. And we were funded to bring out a fabulous drug and alcohol nurse practitioner who really helped us for 12 months and sort of rotated these patients onto opioid replacement. But then obviously his funding disappeared, so he disappeared. So then some of these patients rotated back to heroin, which was just tragic to see that we took away their opioids. We were able to give them some help for 12 months, and that funding dried up. So then they had no other help, so they went and sourced heroin. And they were using, so I had sort of a cohort of patients that were rural patients, sourcing heroin to use a couple of times a week. They were quite creative with how they used it, just so that they could get decent sleep a few times a week or had some pain relief. So when you're seeing average normal people doing that, I just think we've got a real problem.
Yeah, and I've often heard people talking about cannabis being used as a kind of addiction therapy, or to get people off opiates. Have you seen that in the region?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So often what I'll do is I'll titrate them up, and then when we get to therapeutic cannabis levels, I'll write to their GP, and their GP will usually then start deprescribing opioids because they don't need it anymore.
And what's the effect on these patients? Like, how do their lives change as a result?
I've got patients, and look, everyone responds differently to cannabis. It's not a magic bullet for everyone.
Sure.
It's not a magic bullet for anyone, but I do quite regularly see patients having profound life-changing effects. And for some, that will be early on in their cannabis journey, as in a couple of weeks in. You'll get patients that have had an excellent response to pain very quickly, and they're quite happy. Others, it may take a few months, especially complex pain. And I tell those patients, prepare, this is going to take us probably a couple of months to sort this out. And the others, the ones that sit on cannabis for 6-12 months that have the most profound effects, is what I see is they come back and they've started to lose weight. Their mental health's better. Their skin's better. They're moving more. They're starting to create all their own good chemicals because they're back in sync. They're moving more. Life's working better for them. So they just become a lot happier. And the beauty of cannabis too is that you can give them dose ranges to play in. So you can say to them, look, on a good day, only have this much. See if you can sit down around about this much. But here's your dose range. If you're having a hell of a day and your pain's really bad, then I want you to, play in about these ranges. So I think because cannabis is such a robust and flexible oil, being able to give patients toolkits that they can dose with themselves really gives them sort of some autonomy back over their pain or whatever they're trying to manage.
It's really interesting because I know that we also hear a lot about things like the ice, endemic in the bush and things like this. I guess when you're looking at some really vulnerable members of the Australian community at large, people living in rural environments who, are suffering serious substance addiction disorders, I suppose, is there any level of support that you find with, because it just feels like yourself and possibly other clinics that are introducing people to medical cannabis, that's great, but is there any level of support from government or anything else that might be there to help people in that situation?
Look, there's ad hoc support. So what I've found with the elder population is that home care packages will fund their cannabis products. So I do have elderly rural patients that are able to access it that wouldn't normally be able to afford it because they're on a home care package through the Commonwealth. So that's fabulous. That solves that problem. For under 65s, so no. I have tried with some of my NDIS patients to get it put through their plans. The NDIS will argue that it's covered elsewhere. I'll argue that it's not covered elsewhere in Australia and that it's simply an out-of-pocket expense. But they won't wear that. It seems the self-managed NDIS patients are better able to put it through their plans. And I've had some of my patients with some success that way.
Okay. Yeah. And it's even more alarming when you think about all the cuts to the NDIS in recent years. Yeah. So, where's the money likely to be for that? That's Yeah, and it's
let
also
alone when you hear about all the rorting in the NDIS
yes,
too.
yeah.
Well, this is only a short podcast. We won't go there.
Yeah, we can get you back for episode number 2.
No. Don't start me on that one.
Form.
Yeah, don't start me on that.
No, so in terms then of, let's say, for example, I guess, looking at addiction to substances like we've talked about heroin and methamphetamine, but what about if a patient were to come to you as a long-term cannabis user? I'm just going to say, someone who's been hitting the cones every morning since 1993, and, basically they've heard about this whole medical cannabis thing and they want to get on board, but how are they going to get the dose that they require, that their body will tolerate, which I assume would be about 10 grams a day.
Someone who
it's all around 7 grams a day.
someone who hasn't stopped since you were both in your Nirvana days with
since 1993 in Melbourne. Okay. So firstly, they're my favorite type of patients. I love them. They're great. They're cannabis experts. And I mean that quite seriously. They really know cannabis. They're really familiar with it. A lot of my work, I have to do half the work when they come to my door. In some ways, in other ways, I have to do a lot more work. So what I usually say to these patients is I talk to them. The first question I ask them is, what have you been treating with that cannabis? What have you been using that for? What are you treating? And they'll always come up with the answer. They've always got something they're treating. So I challenge anyone that's sort of looking at if it's a family member or a friend that is using long-term illicit cannabis, they are treating something. There is something, that there is something. So that's the first question I ask. One of the biggest conversations I have with these patients is the importance of CBD in their cannabis regime. And I tell them about sort of most of them will have some missing knowledge in their cannabis knowledge, and it's usually around the ECS. So I'll talk to them about the endocannabinoid system, how powerful it is. A lot of them have heard about terms like dopamine and things like that. So we talk about how the cannabis is actually meant to regulate that system and how we can manipulate it to use the cannabis. I talk about THC deposits, long-term cannabis use, frontal lobe THC deposits, how CBD can be neuroprotective, all that kind of stuff. So I really sort of try and get them up to speed with modern cannabis education and what we know about the plant, and try and get them thinking, hey, this is a medicine now. We're using this as a medicine. Talk to them about illicit strains, the risks, the problems with that, the PGR, the sprays. We don't know what they're sprayed with. We don't know strain. So I sort of get them to, I guess, shift their existing cannabis knowledge sideways a bit and enhance it. And then we go off onto a medical journey. And I can tell you, I've never had one. I say to all of the illicit users, you're going to be blown away by the quality of the cannabis you get. You are not going to need as much. You will at least halve your use, and you're going to use it a lot smarter. So all of them come back usually at the 3-4 week mark and say, oh my God, I can't believe it. I know what you mean now. I can smell it, I can taste it, I can feel it. So they get that more full-bodied experience of cannabis.
Yeah, and they know what they're taking as well. Like, not that, exactly. I mean, I guess, nothing would have prevented someone back in the day from, buying seeds through the mail, and doing their own plant. And, if the seed packet said that was a particular cultivar, then they might have thought that that's what they were growing. But, when you can actually understand, from a label, what the percentage strength is, I imagine that that's quite different to what many of those types of patients would be used to.
Yeah. Yep. And I talk to them about the terpenes, the cannabinoids, the percentages, how we can use it so that you're not really frying through your tolerance, all that kind of stuff. So really smart cannabis use, and also some cannabis etiquette too. Just around public use, all that kind, just the normal stuff.
Yeah. And I think as well, there's possibly, I was talking to one user who had gone through this journey, and he was saying to me that one of the things that when you've come from, a decade or more sourcing from the black market. He's like, the place where I would normally have my cannabis was in my bedroom. And now I have a portable vaping device. And provided I'm, not annoying other people with my vape or anything, I can actually take that out of the home, and I can, have my medication wherever and whenever it suits me. And, the kind of that in itself is a release of stigma, I think, because they're not being forced into their room to hide from from everyone.
That's actually massive for them. That's one of the biggest things they struggle, well, not struggle, but that requires a little bit of adaptation, is moving from the, the outdoor toilet or the bedroom or wherever you smoke your cannabis, to actually integrating it, having your loved ones accept it. I often have patients that still may have problems, not with a partner or family, sort of getting their head around them, using it openly, things like that. So there's, unfortunately, because of the amount of stigma still around cannabis, sometimes it feels like 50% of your job is unpacking stigma.
Absolutely.
And just educating. That's probably one of the most frustrating parts.
Do you think it's worse rurally or the same?
Yeah, no, far worse.
Oh,
So probably not so much. I don't find that there's stigma from, say, the general public, patients, things like that. I'm seeing more stigma amongst pharmacists, other health professionals. That's where I find the stigma, not so much the patients. The country people are usually like, they're like, yeah, it's just weed. But
the doctor's like, that doesn't work. There's no evidence.
It's more like pharmacists. I've had a few problems with sort of people being stigmatized in local pharmacies and things like that.
The evidence, that evidence piece that some doctors say, I just, it doesn't stack when you think about how many people will go to the ends of earth, right, to access and pay through the nose. It just doesn't make sense for something that wasn't doing anything. Do you know what I mean? The uptake and the demand without PBS subsidies and things like this. It's just, I
know your classic patient, I just think, is the ADHD patient. They're usually male, these patients. They've had undiagnosed ADHD for decades. They've got anxiety, there's all the sort of classic problems that go along with that. They've been self-treating with cannabis for years and years. And yet for years, we've told them that cannabis doesn't work and that it's not effective, and that it's a drug. And these people have spent 20 years sucking on a bong because they know it's the only thing that's worked for them. They know it's the only thing that's helped them. So what I find too, and I think this is quite interesting, I've really only seen this since the pandemic, and I've certainly discussed it with quite a few of my colleagues. They're seeing the same thing, is that we're seeing patients are actually angry with us now. They're angry. They're saying, you give it, the doctor wants to put me, they want to put me on this. It doesn't fucking work. This doesn't work. This made me fat. This doesn't, this just made me funny in their head. So there's certainly less tolerance, I think, for us than what there was 10 years ago. I think the patients are tired. They're tired of medicines that don't work. They're tired of especially some of the mental health drugs are really strong, really knock them about. They want their mood better, but they don't want to be blunted. They want to feel emotion. So I'm not sure that we've actually got it right. And I think the patients are coming back to us and saying, hey, they don't work. These tablets don't work. Listen to that.
In the interest of balanced discussion, I can't say that cannabis was ever a drug that I associated with losing weight. Especially in the university days, there was several extra tubs of ice cream or Tim Tams that got obliterated as a result of cannabis. At least for Andrew.
That went well past the university days. Right? That only finished up yesterday.
I'm still under the effect from 10 years ago. 15.
I must admit, when in my Hillsville days, when I was there and smoking some very nice Hillsville green, it was back then. Yes, the weight went on. I agree. I think with what I tend to see though with the medical cannabis is it actually comes off. So it's
that's good.
Yeah.
Well, when you're comparing it to, you know, different types of drugs that maybe make you retain that or fluid or whatever it is that's making you, you know, blow up beyond normal, it makes sense for sure.
I think though, just sort of picking up from a point you were talking about, I suppose that extent or degree of distrust from the patient cohort, am I right in sort of surmising that that comes from years of really kind of not having a seat at the table, in the sense that, you know, the entire sort of healthcare model, we sort of entrust to sort of, you know, make the right decisions about what's being prescribed. And I don't know, it's different doctor to doctor, but some doctors you'll go to seemingly have no interest in at a follow-up asking you, how are you, you know, how are you going with things, or what, or even at an initial appointment, have you tried this before? What's been your experience? There's, you know, they come from a different school of thought of, I think you've got this and I'm going to prescribe you that, and, you know, off we go. And yeah, a patient's not being heard enough. Is that part of the problem, do you think?
I think that's a very good point. I think that for you know, long-standing reasons, medicine's been hierarchical, and we've been running hierarchical models where, you know, the doctor, the nurse, the health professional knows best, and it's a downward model. We feed information down. I think that the patients, I agree, they need to sit at the table with us, and we need to listen, and we need to hear what they're saying. We need to respect that people have unique lived experiences, and we also need to probably understand and respect the role that trauma has in people's lives as well. So practice more trauma-informed care, and the recognition of neurodivergence within society. I mean, yeah, I agree. I'm 100% on the same page. I think that we need to change in some ways our approach and how the patient experiences healthcare, because they bring very valid points to the table as well.
Yeah.
On the other side of considering a patient, what are some of the risk factors that you look for in terms of not prescribing? Like, what would stop you from prescribing for somebody? Is it because the condition doesn't qualify, or is it because maybe there's a type of history that makes you a little bit apprehensive about, you know,
yeah, sure.
cannabis?
That's actually a really good question. And there are some patients that I have only, despite illicit use of cannabis flower, that I have only introduced CBD for, and there'll be patients where there's housing insecurity, or where there's perhaps a person in the house where the cannabis may not be safe. So there may be, you know,
what is that? What do you mean?
Oh, so the cannabis could be diverted and sold, or
Right.
So if I have sort of, and I say to patients that perhaps, I think, I'll say to most patients, you know, if there's any diversion of the cannabis, then obviously we cancel scripts. I mean, we can tell how much cannabis patients using just by pulling up our script software and looking at, you know, what they're accessing. So you can sort of keep a back end eye on it a little bit. There's certainly schizophrenia. You would have great caution in prescribing. You'd want to know, you'd want to probably have discussed it with their psychiatrist or someone who's one of their main mental health clinicians. It's not to say it's completely contraindicated in schizophrenia. It's not. You can use it, but you've got to be a little bit more selective with what you do, and assess the patient a little bit differently. I'm just trying to think what else.
I think I've even seen cannabis prescribed for schizophrenia.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
I think it's old information. Cannabis and schizophrenia are contraindicated. It's old information in some types, yes.
When I saw that, my mind was blown, and probably the wrong terminology to use, but it was just like, it was, when I saw that, I was like, that's the old adage. You just don't, that they're correlated is what we've been told for the last 60 years plus, you know what I mean? So when I was actually looking at the data and saw that there was scripts of medical cannabis, I'm assuming probably more on the CBD side of things, but still, it was just so strange to see that correlated. I was really kind of shocked almost.
Yeah, the patients I probably have the most caution with is the older patients who are on a lot of other medications, and they might be on an anticoagulant or something like that. that sort of gives me a bit of pause. You've really got to look at what medicines they're on, have a good think about what their liver's doing, you know, how it's converting those medicines, how it's going to convert the cannabis. Is you know, why drug going to make cannabis more available, or is it going to make it less available? So they're sort of the polypharmacy is probably more of I'd have more concerns with them. Patients with mental health disorders, if they're linked in and they're well managed, it shouldn't be a problem.
I've also heard some doctors say THC and heart conditions just because of the increased heart rate potential.
Yeah, so unstable, you know, unstable heart rhythms. Yeah, you'd have some caution there with THC.
Very interesting.
Sorry, Mitch, don't want to interrupt your flow.
No, my flow has come to an end.
Friday afternoon, Mitch.
I think that's all very I think they're the types of questions people are interested in, you know what I mean, in terms of thinking about what's it good for, what isn't it good for, because I think we do spend a lot of time talking about how amazing, and it gets a bit of a, you know, you can do it for everything. I think it's good to sometimes balance it out a little bit in that light.
True. Well, I'm happy to talk about the patients I find the trickiest to balance on cannabis.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear that. Like, there's, you know, it's relevant.
Patients, the trickiest patients, believe it or not, are those poor, darling old little ladies that are crippled with osteoarthritic pain. They're very difficult to treat, those bony pains, and I feel so sorry for them. They've worked so hard all their lives. They're in their 80s. They've, you know, had multiple children. They've you know, nursed husbands and parents, and they're riddled with it. So they can take a little bit of work. We usually get there, but they can take a few months to get right.
It's just old ladies. That's it. They're the only ones that suffer from osteo.
No, man. Ladies. No. Well, unfortunately, I haven't. Oh no, I've got some.
They don't make it as long.
It's usually I've got statistically no, unfortunately.
Yeah, we cark it earlier, unfortunately.
Yeah, because you've got to talk out your stress more. Then you'll live longer.
Maybe we just don't want to deal with osteo.
Yeah, osteo avoidance.
Osteo avoidance.
So younger.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Don't manage your mental health and
nah, let it all go to the wayside because we were out earlier anyway. No patience.
Yeah.
Interesting. And I'd imagine that cohort would be probably similar to maybe very young patients or pediatrics in terms of the product formats you might be selecting for those patients would be a little bit different as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. The products you're using in an older person is completely different. You're really trying to tackle it from a few angles too. Topicals, you know, oral formations. I've even got little old ladies that have said to me, Simone, please prescribe me the flower. I want the flower.
Get Nan on the bongs. Get Nan on the bongs, I say.
So I've got ladies that have older ladies over 80 that use flower and find it quite effective.
Wow, that's I'm just trying to imagine what
they have a chuckle when they tell me about what their grandkids say.
I said it earlier, but you know, my Nan, putting a little bit of Bailey's in the old special tea, it's probably akin to that, like Nan's potpourri or something like this. Trying to imagine your grandma with it, Andrew.
Imagine. What are you talking about?
Well,
I wanted to ask, I know we've sort of touched on, so basically that, you know, bone on bone, for want of a better term, pain is just very difficult to treat with cannabis.
We can get there. It usually takes a bit of patience and it can take some experimentation. And usually what happens is I don't see these patients respond till we really are getting into some decent THC doses. And what I say to them is, we're going to take a long time to get there because you're 80. You're on 15 other medications and you walk with a walking frame. And the last thing I want is you falling over and doing your hip. That's just a disaster. So we're going to go so slow, build up your tolerance so slowly. So I feel sorry for them because often they're not actually reaching anything that's remotely touchable, you know, from a pain perspective, because they require such big doses, but you've got to creep them up there so slowly. So they spend the first month feeling nothing. And they're frustrated and so that can be a bit tricky.
Okay. What
And then
about?
then you come in to see Nan on the Tim Tams next
Yeah.
month too, just completely watching, Ren and Stimpy or something. I'm not sure.
Yeah, after
The vape,
after
the vape
60
pen on the
workout.
TV table next door to them. Yeah.
Yeah, unbelievable scenes.
No, so what then about I guess some of the, I'm just curious about the cohort in regional Australia. I'm thinking about the price point, because you said before that effectively it is prohibitive for a lot of patients. Is the end result of that people just continue to access via cheaper routes on the black market? Is that still rife?
Yeah, the big delay. So why a lot of my patients do have to access black market still, and that's simply because of supply delays. So that the pharmacies we have to use are in Melbourne. So then they're waiting for it to come up, or Australia Post over COVID, or say no more. So there'd be delays on shipping. Yes, so that does force patients, unfortunately, back to the black market.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Just that usually, because I mean, we will find that it's usually, depending at the moment, it doesn't seem to be as bad as maybe it was in COVID. It's still
not up in regional Vic.
So in terms of, and it's not the kind of scenario where you can order in advance type thing.
Yeah, they do. Look, if I say to patients, allow a week, order a week before, and then you should be pretty right. But that doesn't always happen that way.
Wow. So even just a day or two, it's that bad that you're back on the Well,
and is it in all? I mean, with someone that would have visibility around what the black market pricing looks like at the moment in Bendigo versus what a legal product is like.
And just got a weekend coming up.
I do. I'm actually in Bendigo this weekend. Just made the plans then, actually. But what can $100 buy me on the main street? No, what's the situation around kind of the difference in pricing? I know that's a broad query, but is it that much less? Because we've seen the price of flour in the legal market come down, from sort of where it was
especially
a
if
year
you've
ago.
got a concession card. It's fabulous because you can access the IndieMed, the 15 grams for $95. So that's cheaper than street weed. Way cheaper. The big players, their prices are coming down. You can pick up a good quality 10 grams of cannabis in Australia for between $120 to $130 these days, and that's good quality. If you want to go boutique, and there's certainly excellent boutique cannabis available in Australia now, then you're looking at about 170, 180. Your midpoint's around about 150 for 10 grams.
Yeah, but then street prices, they sell them by the ounce or the Q.
Yeah, so street prices up this way, it really is dealer dependent. So it's between $300 to $400 per an ounce. Still got patients that will go down to Melbourne rather than get it locally. The quality coming out of Melbourne is quite hit and miss. Some will be good, some will be bad. So it's just who's around.
You'd probably prefer to pay overs in Bendigo than cop the petrol these days, I'd say.
Yeah.
It's that's more expensive.
Train fares are dear too.
My goodness. But how do people find the comparison? Like, obviously, when treating a medical condition, you go from Australian GMP, let's say, to Terry's Bunch down the road. You know what I mean? Like, how does that?
Old mate around the corner.
Yeah. Just
I always tell my patients, because without if someone was to hypothetically grow some cannabis in their backyard, the label might come and say, well, this strain here is 22%. Well, that's 22% in optimal growing conditions, controlled growing conditions, picked at optimum time. Who knows how to pick their backyard cannabis at optimal THC time? So I say, while your seed might say it's 22%, 25%, really, it most likely won't be that, especially if it's an outdoor grow and there's different factors. So it's much more hit and miss. Yeah,
but they might have an amazing lemon tree just next to it. They might be really, quite adept in the old garden.
This is quite an elaborate hypothetical proposition.
Elaborate. Yes, hypothetical.
I've learned not to underestimate some of the let's say backyard growers. I mean, when I was living in Washington State working on the farm, I was in a rural area, and there was some people there that I was living and working with that really, let's say, were not very well educated, had never left the state, let alone the country, let alone the state.
You would have fitted right in, I imagine.
Yeah, it was, at the time it was rural Trump America. It was a very interesting experience.
Wow.
But then all of a sudden you would talk about cannabis and they became some kind of, chemist. They knew everything about the decarboxylation, the temperatures, the solvents for the extraction. They understood that you needed thin white film distillation to further purify it, and then chromatography machine to get it was just the level of.
Would we have a conversation though like that with someone, say in the ACT, who's got a little home grow on their balcony of a nice little block of apartments?
You get a patient
making
on
their own RSO.
Yeah, exactly. Totally.
Backyard ACT.
Yeah, just a little Rick Simpson enthusiast, if they can produce enough to make.
I get patients that do this, and I see and hear of patients that are still, that are doing that still. So cannabis is just still sitting in such a wide spectrum of use, really.
Oh, and everything you need to do it is there on the internet. I mean, you can just really, you just read all about it to get up and started, at least at a base level.
Yeah, you can have an answer in 5 seconds.
Yeah, not advocating for that, obviously, on this very professional. But
that would be illegal.
Yeah, it is. It is illegal.
All hypothetical.
Yeah, completely. No, but it's a very interesting thing to ponder, because I eventually think, in the fullness of time, we will see that type of scenario in Australia. I just can't, if America just passed a Safe Banking Act, you can't imagine they're too far away with federal legalization.
Exactly.
Western Europe as well.
I agree. I think if you can go to Canada and you can buy 5 milligrams of magic mushrooms over the counter there, well.
I didn't know this. Yeah. So hang on, now I've got to do Bendigo and Canada in the one weekend. This is going to be a very big weekend.
Same thing, isn't it?
I did actually have a question.
I think our war on drugs, we got it wrong.
We got it so wrong. We got dragged into Nixon's war on drugs, didn't we? Along with many other nation states. But I had a question about sort of the spot we're in right now, where there's some great field work being done by the likes of yourself, and great reports coming out of the field about people who were at their wits' end, are trying something new, and it's working for them. And in the interest of balanced, as we've touched on, there are some people who it won't work for, but you won't know if you don't have a go. So for those people that do try it and get something out of it, I guess I think about the situation we're in with mental health, because you touched on this earlier, and we had a Royal Commission. We're at a crisis point. I mean, how much of a difference do you think this one medicine might actually be able to make in that space? And I guess I'm drawing on your experience of seeing patients on SSRIs.
This is probably the part that actually makes me quite, in some ways, quite emotional, in other ways, quite disappointed at our own health systems and at the systems that I work in. So I have some patients that have had profound sexual trauma and profound physical abuse, and that have been institutionalized and things like that. So terrible, terrible trauma. Cannabis has been the only thing that has given them release and given them a life back. So they're a good example of patients that have converted over from illicit to medicinal and gone sailing, just loved it, have now got the tools to manage their own mental health, their own trauma, they're sleeping better. We can be really creative with those patients because we can give them THC oils, they can use flowers, and I say to these patients, if you want cannabis to be your long game, to manage your health, your mental health, we can be smart with that. We can use this plan, we can manipulate it to look at things like nightmares, flashbacks, sleep, all that kind of stuff. But in the end, what happens with these patients is we give them the tools and they end up managing their own trauma, their own flashbacks. the CBD, it really helps working on their neuroplasticity in their brain. They need to keep them linked in with, all their other providers. And we just see huge improvements in them, huge improvements in what they define as their health and their wellness. So while they mightn't, perhaps be full functioning people that would say hold a high level 9-to-5 job, that's not going to happen. But they're happy, they're content, their family relationships are good, they're friends, they can go out, they can go to the supermarket, things like that. So for these people, that's massive, that's huge. And I think that nothing else in those people's lives have done that or given that to them, but cannabis has.
And it prevents them from potential side effects of SSRIs, unintended consequences of both being on them and then withdrawing from them. It prevents them from ending up in an emergency department requiring acute mental health care for trauma that, that they're working through. It makes me mad as well, because I think about how I wish that this conversation that we're having right now could actually be played to young doctors that are going through med school, future doctors, so that they understand that here's a nurse who actually works in the field, who ventures around central Victoria, sees people at the coalface and has seen these results. And yet look at where we are from a regulatory standpoint. Almost all medical cannabis is unapproved. Therefore, no PBS, none of this. I mean, you just got to ask the question, has there ever been a therapeutic good in Australia that has been an unapproved therapeutic good in Australia that has been used so prevalently with so much reported success in the field? It's like, why are we still here? Why does every patient need a per patient approval, or the doctor needs to be approved to prescribe this stuff? I just think it's bonkers.
Oh, I completely agree. I had a nurse practitioner from California come and stay in Bendigo 2 weeks ago, and she came out and she wanted to come work with me for a day. So she came out to Heathcote and spent the day working in the cannabis clinic that we were doing out there. She was just blown away by what we have to go through to get cannabis to our patients here. And certainly the scenario she described over in Santa Barbara and California is that it's a dispensary model. Your card is essentially your license, and you go in and you can talk to a person who works in a dispensary about, what does this strain do, and what does this strain do, and what does this do? There's edibles, there's topicals, there's wide range. Wow. I just think I agree. I think it's madness. I think that it's over-regulated.
Is it? Do you reckon? I actually have never looked into this, but do you know how hard it is to get one of those little green card licenses in California that they've had around?
No, I don't think. No. I think it's literally just your license to prove that you're over 18.
Okay. They've gotten. Yeah.
Okay. Like you just have to show ID.
Wow. Goodness me, that's tough.
So she was explaining. She said, "God, your THC percentages over here are really low." She said most of the dispensaries at home, she said they're all about 30%.
Goodness me. That's
quite interesting, because I will rarely prescribe a 30%.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's not really about the amount of THC. It's more about the profile of the actual product itself, which is far beyond just the mere THC levels. I understand that high THC level, a lot of, let's say, rec patients might look for, because it's like seeing a high alcohol amount like you would a beer with more.
I guess with cannabis we've got so few yardsticks to use. Like, we could talk and say, oh well, the linalool in this one's really great, but then it kind of can get a bit too highbrow too. I think the using percentages is probably a more accessible yardstick for patients and clinicians alike. But I completely agree. From a back end perspective, what I'm looking at is actually the terpene profile. So with Phytoca, when I saw your profile, was like, oh my God, have a look at what you put in this oil. So yeah, the terpene profiles and the profile of the actual Chemivara plant is the most important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's very important to make that distinction across products. I mean, do you find that there is, though, a general range of THC, CBD that you tend to gravitate towards?
Yeah, I think probably like most independent prescribers that you have a bit of a cool kit. A cool kit. A toolkit, that was Freudian. A toolkit of products that you're familiar with, that you use, that you know how they work. I also use cannabis myself. So obviously I drive some of it myself and usually have a good feel on what's good for bony pain or what's good for nerve pain. So yeah, that's what we do.
Excellent. Well, I think it's been a very interesting discussion. Andrew, is there anything else we need to take up more of Simone's precious time?
Well, all I can say is I feel that we could very easily do a part 2. So at the risk of ambushing you in the middle of our...
There's no risk. You do this all the time, Andrew.
Well,
you put them on the spot and make them commit on camera.
It's you don't have to say yes, but we would love to have another chat at some point.
Happy to, because you two are just such fun.
We try. And,
I think you're the first person that's ever said that.
The nurse, isn't it?
Yeah. No, thank you so much, Simone. It's been great, actually. Just hearing from someone who actually is, as I say, right at the coalface and seeing a lot of the stuff that we only read about. So really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. We'll let you, rest up and get ready for another big week out in the field next week. And for what it's worth, your voice held up the whole way through today. So
I know.
Although, ironically, it may have just dropped out then. Oh no, that's all right.
I think it did drop out actually. Oh well.
I heard you the whole time.
Okay, that could have been me.
Don't give yourself more credit, Andrew. You're not a dropout. But it's it was an absolute pleasure to have you, Simone. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. Because as I said, we haven't had the nurse practitioner role on this show yet, and it's great to have you as our first. So thank you very much.
Yeah, awesome. We'll see you. Probably see you in Bendigo this weekend.
Yes.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
And just coming up for the 2-for-1 deal from Jono.
Yeah.
Fabulous. Okay.
All right.
Have a wonderful weekend, guys.
Yeah.
See you later.
Okay.
See you soon.
See ya.